Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating question about learning. How do we actually learn to do things we haven't been explicitly taught? This is the very heart of creativity, problem solving, and even the way we use language every single day.
So, just think about it for a moment. Every single day, you see sentences that you've almost certainly never heard spoken before. You navigate situations you've never encountered. This isn't just about pulling things from memory. It's a much more active, dynamic process of generation. The big question is, how do our brains do it? That's what we're going to explore.
Now, there's a formal term for this ability, and it's called generative performance. Basically, it's our capacity to go beyond just repeating what we've learned. It's about applying the knowledge we have to brand new situations and, in a way, creating totally new behaviors.
An analogy I really like for this is thinking about Legos. Direct teaching, well, that's like getting a kit with instructions to build a specific car. You follow the steps, and you get the car. But generative performance, that's when you understand how the blocks themselves work, how they connect, what they can do, which lets you throw the instructions away and build something completely new, like your very own spaceship.
So how does this actually work under the hood? Well, one of the key mechanisms is something called stimulus equivalence. This is the foundational process that lets our brains form these new untaught connections, almost like magic. What stimulus equivalence really means is that our brains can link things together on their own without us needing to be taught every single connection. It's how we learn that a picture of a dog, the spoken word dog, and the written word dog can all mean the same thing, even if nobody ever sat us down and explicitly taught us all three of those connections. Okay, this process happens through what are called three derived relations. The first one is simple, reflexivity. A equals A. A picture of a dog is a picture of a dog. Done. The second one is symmetry. This is where if you're taught that A equals B, your brain just automatically gets that B equals A. And the third, which is really where the magic happens, is transitivity. If A equals B and B equals C, you automatically derive, without any direct teaching, that A must also equal C. That final leap is made all on its own.
And this builds to something even more incredible. See, it's not just about connecting abstract concepts, it's also about how the meanings and even the feelings tied to them get connected too. This is a process called transfer of function. So to really get this, we first need to define what we mean by function. In behavioral science, a function is simply the effect that something, a stimulus, has on our behavior. For example, the function of seeing a spider might be to evoke a feeling of fear. And that brings us to transfer of function. This is what happens when that behavioral response, like fear, that's attached to one thing automatically transfers to all the other things in that same equivalence class we just talked about. And again, this happens without any direct experience or training. Let's use an example. Imagine you have a fear of spiders. Later on in science class, you learn that the word arachnid is the scientific term for a spider. All of a sudden, that feeling of fear can transfer. You might find yourself feeling anxious just from reading the word arachnid on a page, even though you've never had a bad experience with the word itself. The function, the fear, has transferred through that derived connection. Okay, so we've looked at the theories behind all this. Let's shift gears and talk about how this is applied in the real world. How do teachers and therapists actually encourage this kind of generative learning? Let's look at a few key strategies. One of the most powerful and common forms of generative performance is something called rule-governed behavior. Think about it. We don't need to get caught in the rain 20 times to learn to use an umbrella. Someone just gives us a rule. Hey, if it's raining, take an umbrella. That simple instruction lets us behave effectively without ever having to experience the negative consequences firsthand. Professionals also use really specific strategies to help skills generalize, which just means to apply them in new situations. One way is by teaching lots of different examples of a concept, not just one. Another is teaching loosely, which means changing up the unimportant details, like the setting or your tone of voice, so the learner really hones in on what's critical. And finally, you want to program common stimuli, using materials in your teaching that the learner will actually see and use in their day-to-day life. So let's pull all these threads together. Why is it so important to understand and, more importantly, to promote this kind of generative performance? What's the big deal? Well, this quote really says it all. Just memorizing things has its limits. The real goal of education, of any kind of learning, should be to create thinkers. People who can be flexible, who can adapt to new challenges, and who can solve problems that don't have a clear-cut answer in the back of the book.
When you think about it, this is really the engine of all human progress and our own personal growth. It's our ability to take what we already know, combine it in new and interesting ways, and generate solutions that have literally never existed before. It's how we write poetry, how we design bridges, and how we navigate our incredibly complex social world. And that leaves us with a final thought to consider. While mastering what is already known is, of course, valuable, maybe the ultimate purpose of learning is something more. Maybe it's to prepare us for the unknown. And generative performance? Well, that's the key that unlocks our ability to step into that future, confidently and creatively.